Flores. We asked him to tell us how they've come to dominate the Filipino business scene.
Filipino Chinese businessmen have become our biggest developers, our biggest bankers, our biggest retailers, our biggest manufacturers.
Yes, among the biggest.
Yeah. This was not the case 30 or 40 years ago, 50 years ago.
Yes.
What changed? What happened? What allowed them to seize this time?
I think 100 years ago, 50 years ago, most of the members of the Chinese community were not citizens of the Philippines. So they were part of the Philippines historically, culturally, and in every way, except legally. The Spaniards and the Americans, and then later on, the Philippine Constitution, when the country became independent, there were restrictions on citizenship. And if you're not a Filipino citizen, you cannot own land, you cannot be a lawyer, you cannot be a doctor, you cannot be everything.
And so what happened 30 years ago?
You can only be a trader. You can only be traders, you can be marginal players in the economy. You could be extremely wealthy personally, be the richest guy in the town, but you cannot own land, you cannot own a hacienda, you cannot be a power generator guy, you cannot own the
So what happened?
So I think in the 70s, when the whole world started to see that China is a country that you cannot ignore, so Nixon, Marcos, everybody recognized China. And I remember reading that Marcos wanted to become friends with China, but he did not want the Chinese minority in the Philippines to be under a communist government. So he realized also that the Chinese community has been here for centuries. Parang unfair not to give them citizenship and give them a stake in the economy. So in the 70s, he allowed Philippine-born people here with investments here to become citizens.
So for the first time, they were able to buy land.
They own land now and everything. And I think most of them realized that they're part of the Philippines already. So they're equals already in many ways.
They bought a lot of the properties.
They could own land, they could be developers.
A lot of the properties that they're now developing.
Yes, they could be developers, they could be electric power, and all these other industries that they could go in. They're already Filipinos legally.
One hears a lot of stories about how 50 years ago, relatively richer Chinese businessmen would help a fledgling Chinese entrepreneur. But now when you look at them, they're their own biggest competitors.
It's always the case. It's always the case. Kasi, like Filipinos, when you go to California or Hawaii,
so nothing changed.
You will assist a fellow Ilocano, the same. But entrepreneurs, the worst competitor of a Chinese is a fellow Chinese. The worst and the best. What I mean is, the number one competitor that a Chinese entrepreneur fears the most is a fellow Chinese. And the worst part is a relative. A lot of the Chinese entrepreneurs, the Chinese are not like the Japanese in temperament. The Chinese are very individualistic. Actually, there's a myth. People think that the Chinese are clannish, team effort, they're always together. But when you analyze the individual characters, the most individualistic ang Chinese by nature. Unlike the Japanese, they are really team players. So you will see many Chinese families in the business community. They always splinter and compete with each other, always, almost.
So most or the rest of us are mistaken when we see the Filipino Chinese business community. It's not one.
It's one culturally, historically, but there are many players, and the plus and the minus is the competition. It also makes you a better player. You become competitive.
The business empires we know now were built by the titans like Henry C., John Gokongwei, Lu Shiutan. How prepared is the next generation?
I think the most prepared are John Gokongwei Jr., the son, the brothers, James Go, and the other people are very well trained. It's not only the training of the people, the education, the structures, the IPO, the publicly listed companies, the management, they're very good. And then also Henry C., all the companies are listed and everything. So I think they're very good. Lu Shiutan, people are still having this wait and see attitude. What he has up his sleeves, what is he planning to do? Because he has already listed some companies, but not many children are actively managing.
But this next generation, how good are they compared with their fathers?
I personally believe that they are very more educated. The kids are more educated. They have better support, better managers. But as long as the fathers are there, it's very hard to judge. Personally, because I think even if Mr. John Gokongwei and all these people claim to be retired, they're always somewhere there.
I guess the question is, are they hungry enough to do anything close to what their fathers have accomplished?
Very interesting your question. I asked some of them this question, but I think they have different situations. They might not be hungrier, but they have better education, sophisticated resources. So they might be successful in a different way. They might not be like their fathers who create new industries, but they might become bigger, depends on their priorities in life. Because some might be successful, but that's not their entire priority, only money or something.
Many of these big Filipino Chinese businessmen are investing in China now, or in the last 10 years at least. How much of that comes from a love for their roots, and how much of that is just identifying a business opportunity?
I personally believe money is number one, the reason, because Chinese entrepreneurs, like all entrepreneurs in the world, are the most practical. If China is not profitable, if it's not the biggest market in the world, and they don't want to compete with others, they will just donate money. They won't invest, because investing in China actually is one of the most difficult things in the world. Because the Chinese entrepreneurs in China now are difficult to compete with, number one. Number two, the regulatory and political situation is different, so it's mainly profit motive.
So do they see themselves as Chinese or different from other Filipinos?
I think most tycoons, like ordinary Chinese in the Philippines, see ourselves as Filipino citizens with Chinese cultural background and values. So different in some sense, but similar in faith, and we are in one economy.
Different in what sense?
Difference in priorities. Like I see most non-Chinese priority, I think, is happiness. Personal happiness, like enjoyment, which is not wrong and right. And most Chinese I see are like the Jews in New York and America, already successful, but driven. Priority in life is to be more successful. Even if you're wealthy, you're still working very hard, like the Germans. I'm not saying right and wrong, it's just a matter of priorities, I think, and upbringing.
Are Filipino Chinese businessmen and Filipino Chinese families, are they flabbergasted that other Filipinos don't work as hard or save as hard as they do?
Sometimes there is sadness, because a Chinese tycoon told me, hopefully the government of the Philippines will encourage more saving, because one tycoon told me we have one of the lowest savings rates in Asia because of Spanish and American influence, I think. So if he told me, the tycoon said, if we just increase the savings rate of this country by a little bit, he would have more customers.
So it always comes back to that.
Yes, he would have more customers, and there would be bigger middle class in this country. And the tycoons told me, in a country with very small middle class, it's not good for their business. It's not very. And the tycoons, one tycoon told me, they are only a tycoon in the Philippines, but when they go to Taiwan, Hong Kong, and other countries, or Korea, they are small compared to the others. So they really want a bigger middle class in this country, not because they are idealistic, but it's all practical. If you have a bigger middle class, more people are wealthy, you have more customers, and they will become bigger tycoons than all the rest. They could be world-class tycoons.
Okay. Wilson, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Coco.
Meantime, Francis Chua, the Chairman Emeritus of the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry and the Honorary President of the Federation of Filipino Chinese Chambers of Commerce and Industry, tells us that success came in part from weaving business and politics.
The Chinese is encroaching